The development of Halo 4 is always really interesting to take a closer look at because not only was this 343 Industries' very first Halo title, but the actual development process in making this game moved along very quickly, with most of the development happening in 2011 and 2012. Interestingly enough though, over the years, development kits containing pre-release builds of Halo 4 have surfaced online. Some of them popped up a few years ago, another one was randomly found on eBay, which was an EA development kit that for whatever reason had a undiscovered Halo 4 build on it. Like 2 years ago, there was a Halo 5 pre-production build, which was a final build of Halo 4 with new things being considered for the future of Halo and kind of a testing ground. And then just a couple months ago, there was a rare 2011 Halo 4 build, which was the most recently found development build of Halo 4. And while we don't actually have development kits ourselves to take a look at some of the files that had come up when these development builds of Halo 4 were leaked online, we actually partnered up with Galaxy, who is a gaming preservationist, data miner, and modder who has a small YouTube channel focused on documenting this type of stuff. So we decided to partner up with him to take a closer look at all of this really interesting cut Halo 4 content that was at some point in consideration for the final release of the game, but never actually made it into the release. So there's definitely a lot to unpack, but to start things off, we wanted to look at the Halo 4 campaign, because so far there's actually 3 separate campaign levels that are accessible in some of the earlier builds of Halo 4, and it's really unique to take a closer look at these. For instance, we can take a look at Dawn, which obviously looks much more bare bones than what we see in the final release of the game. Just besides this being very early in development, it is interesting to notice a few things, like for instance, in this build, the voice actors are actually not the voice actors that we are familiar with for characters like Cortana or Master Chief. They ended up using placeholder voice actors, so things already feel a little bit off when you actually watch this. Listen to this.
I'm not leaving without you.
Our only hope for getting home is down there.
Then we go together.
Chief, I'm trying to protect you. What is it with you and long goodbyes? Go!
I'll find you.
Just find a way home.
But it actually later came out in more recent interviews with the voice actors behind the characters Master Chief and Cortana, Steve Downes and Jen Taylor, that when 343 was taking over Halo 4, there was some consideration to replace the voice actors for these characters. Now, it's unknown at this time what that would have looked like, and it's very unlikely that these would have been the replacement voice actors, but it is interesting that we see placeholder voice lines here, even though in other builds of Halo games like Halo 3, we have been able to hear placeholder audio used as well. Now, over the years, there's actually been 2 versions of Dawn that have surfaced online through these pre-build versions of Halo 4. One of which is this really early version that we can see on Alpha Archive's channel, another great preservation channel if you guys aren't subscribed to, that has a ton of Halo content. It's really interesting to see how this level has changed between different versions, like what we can see on Galaxy's playthrough of a 2011 build, and overall the level is still quite different from what we actually see in the final version of the game. Though I do have to say, at the end of this very early version, when you're floating in space and you just see FUD flying through space to represent what the Forward Unto Dawn will look like in that whole thing, and there's this jetpack stuff going on, it's pretty wild to take a closer look at. The next level, Requiem, is also very interesting to take a look at in these early builds, because this level, while it is playable here, it looks almost completely unrecognizable from anything that we see from the actual Halo 4 level. It's really interesting just because this is a very bare bones level design that just gets you from the beginning to the end, and there's no actual atmosphere put into it yet, but it is cool to take a look at what it looked like in this earliest stage and to see how far the level did end up developing over time. Then the other level we have access to is Infinity, which is where the Forerunners made their debut. So this mission was probably very pivotal because it was probably the first implementation of the Prometheans and where they tested out how it would work in atmospheres based on an actual level structure. Once again, you can tell this build is probably even more primitive than the other 2 level builds that we looked at already. And if you look at the HUD, they also have Promethean vision just labeled straight up as X-ray. I just think that's kind of an interesting detail. But we do see some combat with the Prometheans, and we see how this level was incorporated and built from the ground up first. Actually, on the topic of armor abilities with this whole X-ray vision, a found cut armor ability that was tested out in Halo 4 called Stasis, which would kind of be this force field thing that would explode. Yeah, I don't fully get it, but I mean, it's here. It's something. Also, the Prometheans look absolutely terrifying in this early build of the Halo 4 campaign as opposed to what they ended up looking like when the game actually released. I don't know, there's just something spooky about the way that their faces look here. It kind of gives me some Elden Rings PTSD vibes looking at these now, but still, maybe they were just a bit ahead of their time. Also, before they added the Promethean burst animation on the knight's death, it turns out that there was this alternate animation that they considered, and it's a lot more eerie as you see these souls type thing leaving the bodies of the Promethean knights. Later on though, we can see that they hadn't fully mapped out how the Mantis would look, or they didn't have a model ready for this build. So instead we have this giant Spartan looking thing that serves as the Mantis for testing out the end section of this level, and it's absolutely hilarious. Seriously, this version of the Mantis is by far my favorite. I know we'll never actually get to see it in game, but just knowing that this later turned into this is okay enough for me. Also, you might have noticed this in the first level, but there is an interesting early concept of a cutscene where we would have to see Master Chief leave Cortana behind. We don't really know where this would fit into the overall story because this part never actually played out in the game. Chief and Cortana stick together pretty much the whole campaign until the end, though this seems like some sort of foreshadowing that could have happened earlier in the story that ended up getting scrapped altogether. But we get a good look at the placeholder character models and voices here. It is interesting. Let's take a look.
This is Sierra 117 of the Starship Forward Unto Dawn. We are on station, ready to assist.
Negative copy. Sounded like you said forward Unto Dawn. Come again.
Signal's bouncing in and out. I can't clean it up.
Light up their friend or foe tags. We're going to need something to zero in on.
Sure, because the gunfire won't be enough.
Also, with the level Infinity, there was an E3 version, which was used at the E3 presentation in 2012 promoting Halo 4, which kind of showed off the level Infinity, though it is kind of a heavily scripted out, or there's like an expectation as to what the player is supposed to do, and it's not as open of a level, but still interesting that this version that was shown off is in fact playable. You always wonder with game demos that are shown off at E3, how much of it is actually the game and how much of it is just a very thin line that you have to walk along. It gives us memories of that Halo 2 E3 demo that we never actually got to play. Interestingly enough, since Halo 4 was built off of the Halo Reach engine, Firefight was of course a part of the base version of the game, and for a while it looks like Firefight was in consideration for being a returning feature in Halo 4, as Firefight itself does in fact work in one of the early builds of Halo 4, and it even seems like the HUD was set up and designed specifically for the Firefight game mode, even if it looks like a more primitive design that would have been used as a placeholder. They still wrote things in for the specific Firefight mode of Halo 4. Galaxy actually went ahead and played a few rounds of Firefight on 2 different maps, Sniper Alley and S-Curve, which are both areas that eventually made their way into different sections of Halo 4 later on. But it is interesting just to see this version of Halo 4 Firefight, especially since Firefight was removed from Halo 4. Now, even this Firefight version still has a lot of elements from Spartan Ops, like voice lines at the very beginning. Interestingly enough, you drop in an ODST style drop pod, which would have been really cool. And there does seem to be voice line placeholders connecting things together a little bit, so it is a little confusing how Firefight would have played into the greater Halo 4 story, but just the dialogue at the beginning is even interesting, like in this one on S-Curve.
Fend off the remaining
hello.
Covenant.
Is this thing on?
What is it, BB?
Enemy
Turrets are
incoming.
online, Lieutenant Palmer. I would have done it sooner, but it didn't feel dramatic enough.
I know how much you humans enjoy your drama.
Also, to further the case here, if we load up on Spartan Ops Mission 1, we can see a lot of similarities to the Firefight mode, really showing that the Firefight mode evolved into Spartan Ops. We can see here an early build for the mission core, where apparently the Covenant had found a Halo ring and you have to get the intel for it. And once again, it starts off very similarly. You're dropping in an ODST drop pod, and you gotta go and do the thing. Now, on the multiplayer side of things, there's actually a lot of maps that didn't quite make their way into the final release of the game. We actually did a whole video on the cut campaign level from Halo 3 called Forerunner City, and we talked a little bit about this, but in Halo 4 there was a cut map called Forerunner City, which we can take a look at, and it is very interesting. Obviously it's in its very primitive blockout stage, but you could get an idea that this could have been a really unique take on what a Forerunner City would have looked like, especially if it would have gotten the full environmental design team working on something like this. Now, this map was of course developed by Certain Affinity, who worked on many of the Halo 4 multiplayer maps. However, some of the cut maps were also developed by Digital Extremes, who was contracted by 343 Industries to help with the production of the game's DLC map packs. Fortress was another map that didn't make its way into the final version of the game, which is probably one of the maps that would have been the coolest had it did make its way into Halo 4's launch, just because it is this massive map that almost reminds us a little bit of Sandtrap or Sandbox, as it has a similar setting with those giant Guardian towers surrounding it. Though this map never made the final cut, there was another map known as Dish, which would have been a little bit of a smaller to mid-size map, and in this footage you can actually see Galaxy driving around the map and driving in a Revenant, which was a vehicle that was cut out of Halo 4 from those Halo Reach days. This level Island looked like it would have been way more industrialized than maybe what you think it would have actually looked like. There's just this big factory powerhouse type vibe with it. There's some water over here you can look at, and this indoor type area. It's kind of a really unique build. Interestingly, of course, it was also cut from the game. Then there was another Certain Affinity map called Station, which we can't really tell what the aesthetic would have been, but based off the title, we could assume it would have been some human type structure. Though, if you look at it right away, it does kind of give us a little bit of vibes as to maybe the Club Herrera area from Halo Reach's campaign, or maybe the Sunken Plaza in Halo 3 ODST. Though, without having actual textures, and we're just looking at the blockout version, it could literally be anything whatsoever. But it is interesting, there's kind of this indoor area with some ramps and an outdoor area that circles around back, and it is one of the more unique maps that didn't make its way into Halo 4 either. Then there was also some DLC maps that were put into consideration that never, of course, made the way into Halo 4 either. For instance, there's Constant Strife, which is an interesting name nonetheless for a cut Halo 4 multiplayer map, but also could be a really fitting name for a Halo Infinite map. It kind of looks like some sort of level that would have been inside of a spaceship, and if you look at the map overview, it does in some ways look like it resembles Rat's Nest from Halo 3. There's this map called Peanut, and we really don't know too much about it. To me, it kind of resembles Halo Reach's Tempest a little bit, if that map was in the shape of a peanut. But yeah, otherwise, there's not too much really known about what their plans would have been for this map. There's another space level called Shipyard, which actually looks like a small to medium-sized map that would run kind of very linearly in a rectangle with cross sections in the middle. And then the one level that a lot of people would recognize and would have loved to have in Halo 4 was a remake of Standoff from Halo 3. Now, this map, you can actually quite clearly tell that that is what is going on in this level, but it ended up getting cut, and it doesn't look like they made it too far into the actual development, as you just see the most basic layout of Standoff being recreated here. Also, it is worth noting that there are tags and visuals and a working concept for Halo 3's Sandtrap within Halo 4 that never made its way into final release. However, this was actually never considered for an official inclusion in the release of Halo 4. It was just used in development testing for random things in the sandbox. We'll still keep holding out that we'll get a true form Sandtrap remake one day in the future. Then there was also files discovered of concept art for DLC maps that never ended up actually happening. One called Arrowhead that looks like this. Another one was some Covenant underwater based structure, which probably would have looked really cool. And then there was another called Genesis, which some preservation preservationists have compared it looking similar to the map Vortex from Halo 4, which would have taken place in a crashed Forerunner ship in some desert wasteland. Then there was also a concept for Narrows, the popular Halo 3 multiplayer map, redesigned with a human architectural aesthetic, so it would have been interesting to see how a human version of Narrows would have played out in Halo 4, and there is very little but enough concept art for a Last Resort Halo 3 map, and it almost is insinuated it would have been a paint over of Halo 3's Last Resort. Now this of course never ended up making its way into Halo 4, but we do know the map was remade as Stonetown in Halo 2 Anniversary, which was designed by the team at Certain Affinity, so it is possible that during this later build of Halo 4, those files were already being implemented, tested, and sent around internally. And finally, there was a test map for special effects that was used in Halo 4 that is accessible in some of these early builds of the game as well. And it is really interesting to take a little bit of a closer look and just kind of look around in the whole sandbox that Halo 4 had during the building phase of this game. Galaxy actually speculated that it could have been a testing ground for some of the disintegration effects that was a pretty heavy duty system to build in Halo 4, and they talked about it a bit in a lot of vidocs, so we know that they spent a ton of time working on trying to develop that type of animation to look the way that it did. Maybe this is where they tested a lot of those features out. Still, it's interesting to see this used in one form or another. Now, I've also talked a little bit about some weapons in the past that didn't make their way into the final release of Halo 4, but there were some new ones uncovered as well with these other builds. For instance, the 2011 build of Halo 4 had something called a homing rifle, which would have been a Forerunner gun that probably later got passed up in favor of some different type of Promethean weapon like the light rifle maybe. There's this weapon that's called a mortar launcher, which is just amazing. It shoots these mini wraith shots that aren't quite as powerful as wraith shots, but still pretty powerful. There were some files suggesting that the SMG would have been making a return in Halo 4, though those seem to have been scrapped very early on in development. And there's been some other really interesting things found over time, like a stasis rifle or even a Hunter LMG, which I don't even know what that is or how that would work, but it sounds amazing. Also, the Needler had a different early design in those earlier times of development. There are also some weapons that maybe were realized in Halo 5 Guardians instead of Halo 4, like a burst pistol, likely being more like the Promethean bolt shot in Halo 5. Now, real quick, this video wouldn't have been possible unless we were able to team up with Galaxy. And he has a YouTube channel and he has like 500 subscribers on his channel, and he's been uploading a lot of really cool deleted content from the Halo franchise. Not only is there stuff we haven't covered yet in a video, but all the stuff we did talk about are available to watch in their entirety over on his channel. So if you guys would go over there and check out the content, but also maybe throw a subscription his way as like a thank you for helping us make this video. It'd be really awesome if we could get him up to over 1,000 subscribers. I think that's possible since this content is relevant, and I think a lot of you guys would really like his content. So let's see if we can pull that off and help his channel out a little bit. Maybe we can cover some more cut Halo content in the future if we do actually do that. But if you like our content and you're not subscribed yet, maybe give us a subscription as well, because we do cover a ton of things Halo related. If you change your mind later, that's okay, but just go ahead and try subscribing for now and see if you like what we put out. That's it for today though. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you all next time with a brand new video.